Are you looking for inspiring conversations about faith, film, and life? You're in the right place. Here's the host who knows the right questions to ask, Father Edward Looney.
Hey everybody, it's Father Edward Looney here. Grateful that you tune into the podcast week after week. This week, I thought we would talk a little bit about Our Lady of La Salette. Now, in the archives, back when the show was called How They Love Mary, in the very beginning, I know that I had a show on La Salette. I'm not sure if I've had a few others, but that's what we're going to visit or revisit again today. A beautiful Marian apparition that took place in France in the Alps. And just a very powerful message, too. It's simple in some respects, but very deep in other respects as well. So you kind of have both. And today's guest that I'm going to be speaking with is a person people might know as Sister Anne, or also she now has reverted back to her baptismal name, Mary. And so we're going to be speaking with her. Now, interestingly, is that someone back a number of episodes ago, I think it was when I did the 200th episode, maybe, or maybe before that, but there was an individual who has been a listener of the podcast, at least when it was How They Love Mary, hopefully still listening now. But that individual, when I asked them, because they were a super fan, so Spotify listed them as my #1 listener to all of the podcasts. And so I asked him, I said, his name was Kirby. So you could go back, you could find that episode if you want. But Kirby, I said, if there was someone you want me to interview, who would you want me to interview? And he said, I would want you to interview Sister Anne. She has a YouTube channel. She has the Marian News. And so that's who he said. You know, could have said Father Michael Schmitz, could have said Bishop Barron, but he said Sister Anne of Marian News. And just so happens, someone that I interviewed for the podcast, his episode hasn't dropped yet. So I did the interview months ago, actually, but his book was delayed in coming out. So I'm kind of holding the episode until his book comes out. But he sent me an email and he said, hey, Father, I think you should interview Sister Anne. I helped her publish a book. Think she'd be a great guest. So that's how Father found Sister Anne. She was on my list. I never knew how to contact her. So just providential that we got connected in that way. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but we're going to especially talk about La Salette and the English translation of The Discovery of the Secret of La Salette. So thank you so much, Sister, for joining me today.
I'm very honored to be here. It's always a joy to talk about Mary. She's the big news right now. She is the leader in our times, and we have to listen to her. And she's encouraging us to get through all this. She will crush the serpent, and we don't have to be afraid of all that's happening and falling apart in our world right now.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about your YouTube channel. I think it's pretty prolific, isn't it? I think you get a lot of views, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, what's the basis of it?
The basis of it, I was a Carmelite nun for many years and never expected to leave the cloister. But I had an extraordinary locution. I just heard a voice telling me that I'm supposed to leave and start this new order that Mary gave a rule for during the 1846 apparition of La Salette. I had read, I'd studied apparitions all my life, but I'd never read that she gave a rule. And so I thought, wow, this is interesting. But I knew La Salette because part of it is very, Mary was very straightforward to the shepherds in their own dialogue. You know the story that, telling them that people weren't keeping the first 3 commandments and God would have to punish if they didn't repent. But then she goes off to what she called a secret, and it wasn't a secret forever. She said, you'll reveal this in about 12 years. And they tried to. It took a delay because it was resisted. But the secret was, I read it many times in the past, and I just thought, this is over my head. It's all apocalyptic language. I don't know what it means. I'd have to study French history. Did it come past, or is it still to come? And so that part of it never really grabbed me. But I never noticed that after the secret, she had given a rule for a new religious order, which she calls for the last times. And it turns out the last times in her language is the time when Satan will be very strong and then she will triumph with her son. And then there will be the last time, the second part of the last times will be the next 1,000 years when the church will be very strong, and eventually, and the meek will inherit the earth, and most people will become Catholic. So we're moving into an amazingly new age that Jesus talked about, a new age, and Satan has tried to usurp that term, but something wonderful is happening. And I think that's the merits of so many martyrs over the centuries, so many prayers. And we're called to live through that crossing of the desert into that promised land type. And I don't know how many of us will see the promised land, but we've got to be brave and carry the flag and get over there. So she's the guide. So it took me a while to find that rule. When I heard that locution, Satan can trick you. I mean, and it sounded so comforting. It's like Jesus was like in the room, like putting his hand on you and saying, honey, we're gonna have to move, but we'll be together. I've got a job in a different town. We're gonna have to relocate, but we'll have friends. And I'm thinking, if anybody's struggling and needs some help through those times, I want to be there, but I'm not going to say one word to a nun in this convent until I really check this out. So it took me a while to find that rule. And I was afraid that it would be apocalyptic language too, and just kind of a crazy thing and not really a real rule. But when I read it, I thought, my goodness, this is Vatican II. This is Lumen Gentium. It's all about helping the baptized, but everybody to understand that we're all called to deepest union with God. But, priests get to go to seminary and religious get a novitiate, but lay people don't really get any accompaniment on developing their prayer life. And there's dry periods. There's what do you do when this and that? And this order will be giving ongoing retreat workshops to help people keep up their prayer life, not life-changing retreats, but people serious about their prayer life and to help them. And this order, part of it will be to renew religious life. And it will actually have spiritual hospitals for religious who have lost their fervor, to get them back excited about their Benedictine vows or the Dominican vows, whatever it is. And then, but there's one point in the rule which is a little concerning. It says this rule, the members of this order will help people during the time of the Antichrist. And really the secret of La Salette, which is really not meant to be a secret forever, but just delayed, it mentions the Antichrist. So it's that apocalyptic era that the apocalypse talks about. So we're here.
Wow. So just tell me a little bit about your own vocation then. So, we kind of touched a few of the points, that you were a Carmelite sister, you heard this locution, this inner message, and then you left the convent. So what does that look like, leaving the convent 30 years after being there for almost 30 years or however many years it was? Because that means you have to reestablish yourself. You have to find a place to live, and you've had this order and this structure of life, but then you find this rule that you're living by, this rule for the life of someone following the message of La Salette. So I guess that kind of supplants what you were doing before.
Well, now I realize I didn't answer your question. I was trying to get there because my prioress believed me, my bishop believed me, the sisters believed me. Everybody said, this is real. You've got to trust this, and you've got to, and they helped me expedite all the proper dispensations. And they got me 2 years training in an active community, which was wonderful. And then the sister said, you're ready, go find a bishop, because that's what you have to do when you're starting some congregation. But it was more complicated than that, because, there's only been 6 major rules. Francis, Augustine, I always slipped, Ignatius, Benedict, and there's hundreds of congregations that are attached to that umbrella, and they take their guidance from those 6 major rules. So when I saw this was a rule, and Melanie said there will be hundreds of congregations down the centuries, this is the 7th, maybe the final major rule. And we know from history that whenever there's a rule, it's just a big impetus for a big grace for the church, and lots of vocations, lots of activity, lots of new life, and something special for the church. And so, but the thing with the other major rules, it was their rule. It was Francis. It was from his prayer life, from Ignatius' prayer life, from Benedict's prayer life. This is a rule that just dropped on my head. It's not my rule. And that's one reason, technically, I am Mary Ferron because of my lay vocation. because I'm dispensed from my vows right now so that I can be free to make vows in this new congregation. But I don't like to go by Mary because people think, oh, it's Mary's rule. It's not my rule. It's this Mary's rule. And so it's the mother of God. And so it's not the rule of La Salette either. There is a big congregation that promotes that particular apparition. But this is she called it the Order of the Mother of God. And will just be like the custodian of her messages, trying to get all her messages out from the 1830 onwards, because it's only then that she started giving messages for the world. Before that, it was for a locality or a particular person or a particular diocese or something, but those were really private revelations. But now we have these semi-public revelations when she's talking to the whole world. And compare it to, so anyway, so I got out, I left that congregation. I'm not moving quickly in the right direction. So where do you go? You go home to mom. Like, what do I do now? Where do I go? And so I grew up in Wichita Diocese, which is Catholic Center USA, home of stewardship program. And so many, every parish for 40 years has had a 24/7 adoration chapel. So it's an amazing place to grow up with Catholic places. But so mom had a spare bedroom. She said, just come here, get some advice, get your act together. But I had to get all this translated because how do I know what did Melanie say anything about the rule? What was out there? And it turns out Melanie wrote for 500 letters. She wrote for years with commentary on different things. And she was trying to get the rule. She was working with Pope Leo. We have quite a few documents, and we have all of Maxim, the other seer, his life. We got 3 biographies in French, never been translated to English. So I got my spiritual director turned out to be Father Bernard Georges. We always call it Father Bernie, but he's the founder of Totus Tuus. It's like a summer camp program. And he's a wonderful Marian guy. That's why he called it Totus Tuus. He wanted all the teenagers to be consecrated to Mary. And so he advised me to start a YouTube channel and an internet, and he would send me people to talk to, and I would prepare talks and talk about the apparitions. And he said, then use your YouTube channel to ask for volunteers. So over the years, I acquired like 70 helpers I can translate a few pages. I can translate a chapter. I can translate this much, and it takes some time because they're all doing it on their free time. Because you've ever paid for a translation, you wouldn't want to pay for a translator. It's extremely expensive. And then I had to get that vetted and double checked. And it just turned out a long project. And the Bishop of Wichita, he was already involved with other congregations, and he didn't feel called to let me start there. And so I moved from diocese to diocese. You wait a while, you meet a bunch of people, you give talks, and finally you see the Vicar General, and then you see the bishop, and the bishop says, no, I don't think so. And they never say why, because it's trouble for a bishop to oversee a new young congregation. And then there's legislation, and some of them are already helping some other congregation to get started. And it's not a matter of money, because religious orders are always separate from the diocese. The religious aren't on the payroll normally. So it's not the money, it's just the time. And maybe bishops have had a bad experience with nuns who were disobedient, wouldn't wear a habit or whatever. So it's been a while. So I've been traveling from diocese to diocese, and finally, and this YouTube channel has grown amazingly. I'm up to about 15,000 subscribers. I've got about 130 talks, most of them on Mary's apparitions. And I've got a whole playlist on what Mary has said about the apocalypse. And I've got a whole section on like Marian consecration 201, because once you've done the Devant for consecration, there's a whole nother level you can reach. So I have a whole playlist on how to go forward in your Marian consecration. So it's amazingly popular outside the United States because English is a common language now. So there's people in Japan and Ireland and Italy and Africa that subscribe and write in. So it's interesting. But now I do have a bishop. I do have a bishop finally.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, and hopefully that bishop and other priests will be able to help you to find other women who want to follow this way of life and so forth. So you mentioned a lot of different apparitions. Of course, Our Lady of La Salette, front and center there. We have mentioned the visionaries, Melanie and Maxim. But You've said that, you've given presentations about a lot of the different apparitions, about their apocalyptic nature, things like that. Of the apparitions, maybe I'll qualify it beside La Salette. Which one would you say you turn to? Which one do you think is the most beneficial?
Personally, I have meditated for like 20, 30 years on the messages to the servant of God now. He's a servant of God, Father Gobi, through the Marian movement of priests.
Oh,
Those are
sure.
profound. Mary's talking about it. She's leading you to a deeper life with her consecration. That was part of the Marian movement to help priests encourage their parishioners, anyone in their flock, to get consecrated to her, like she asked for at Fatima. But then she goes into our times, and she describes the book of the Apocalypse, many of the characters there. She has very extraordinary understanding of like who is the dragon, who is the 10-horned beast and the 7-headed beast, and many people think it's more literal, but she goes off on ideology. She describes them as communism, atheism, very profound understanding of where we are now. And she said, these are the beasts we are fighting. And she said, these are what she wants to conquer, this atheistic, anti-God. And I find that very much a corollary to some of the more symbolic things she does in La Salette. And then there's all sorts of, I really love Akita. I love Kibeho. I mean, I love them all, but some of them are really, really profound, because Kibeho was kind of scary because that's fully approved through Rome. And she said there that the genocide there, which it was a French colony. It was a lot of Christians and Catholics killing Catholics. The Hoots, it wasn't just like pagan tribes. It was Catholics killing Catholics. And she said that the whole world would become like Kibeho, turning on each other. And if we didn't repent. And we have to remember that who killed Jesus? It was his own people. I mean, the Jews were split. That's what happened when you have to face the Christ. You either turn to the world and cling to that aspect, even though at the same time you're professing to be of your religion. So I think Catholics can get way far off right now if they don't hold on to Mary to guide them.
Yeah, you know what I love about the La Salette message was that there are these very simple aspects to it. Like Mary says, say your morning and evening prayers. And just a great encouragement. And, I wrote a book for Lent that went through Mary's apparitions thematically. So each week had a different theme. And so, like, one of the weeks was like praying as Mary asked or something like that. And so, to focus on our morning and evening prayers. So to focus, then, some of it, another week of the book was focusing on conversion and how God is calling us to change our life. Well, honoring the Sabbath, keeping holy God's name. So these are things, again, that Mary said at the La Salette apparition. So what else could you tell us about La Salette if people are unfamiliar with it?
Well, it was before Lourdes. And frankly, it was the first modern Marian apparition where you could go and meet the visionaries, because the one before that was 1830. That was a miraculous medal. And but they kept Catherine Labouré kind of anonymous. They struck the medal and distributed that, and there were extraordinary conversions, and that's why it got to be called. It was the Medal of the Immaculate Conception, but there were so many extraordinary miracles, and that kind of brought in the Marian age. People began wearing her medal and taking her seriously, and there was a movement there that people really wanted that dogma to be pronounced. And I think the miraculous medal was definitely an impetus in getting the dogma pronounced. But so people knew that there was some kind of, some visionary who received that, but they didn't know who it was. So when two mountain children, basically we would call them hillbillies, they had no education, they were kept out of schools, they barely got any Catholic catechism, their parents didn't go to mass. It was a mess. And then these kids, the boy himself was the son of the town drunk, and he was growing up in town, and she was sort of abused. Melanie was a child of the Alps, but her mother hired her out all the time from age 6. So, but some shepherd got sick, and the tavern keeper was asked if he would send his son up there for a few days to replace him. And Maxim was afraid of the animals. He was younger than Melanie, had no experience. So they were just thrown together the day before. And so they didn't have time to plot out this whole apparition thing. And they both had a reputation for honesty. And so they were they had their flocks together, and it was September 19th. Within those days, it was the eve of Our Lady of Sorrows, the way it was celebrated in September. And they had taken a little siesta after lunch, and when they woke up, they saw this magnificent, light-filled, light-streaming woman seated on their pile of rocks and flowers where they were playing, and she was weeping. And as they approached her, she stood up and she began telling them that she prayed so hard that her son wouldn't have to punish people for not going to mass, for eating meat during Lent, for not taking their Catholic faith seriously, and for especially blaspheming the name of Jesus. Everybody used his name as a cuss word. And it was just, she said it was very serious, and she couldn't go on much longer. And so they were thunderstruck listening to all this. And she was encouraging them, yes, to say their prayers. And then after a while, one couldn't hear the other. She was talking to them separately to give them a secret. Now that apparition began in their dialect. They were on the Alps. It was almost the border of Italy. So their dialect was half Italian and half French, and they did not know French. And so when she began giving them a secret, it was in French. And so it's not clear if they really understood what they were hearing at the time. It was mostly a vision. They were receiving a huge panoramic vision and some words, but they kind of put it in their own words later, what they saw. And so, and then the young boy, he had much less experience. And so his was simpler and shorter, but, and it was Melanie who got the brunt of the secret. And the secret was kind of shocking because it was very, very harsh language. God was so angry with the Catholic leaders, and that meant the political leaders. In those days, there were a lot of Catholic kings and princes and dukes and duchesses and all that. And there were not just the hierarchy, the bishops and the cardinals, but also leaders like anyone responsible for other people. And that includes parents and business owners. And it was very harsh language, and especially religious in their convents. She didn't want any compromise with the world. You had to. And so it was very shocking language to hear her talk. Like, it was very much like somebody right out of the Old Testament prophets, woe to you kind of thing. And then she describes what's going to happen, but it's like apocalyptic language and like symbolic stuff. And then she talks about wars, and you can't really tell if it's current monarchs and current person things she's talking about, or if it's something in the future. It's very mysterious language. And then only after that did she give Melanie the rule. And while she was giving the rule, Melanie saw in vision down the Alps, she saw little clusters of religious men and women religious, and the priests wearing the habit and doing different apostolic works. So Melanie kind of fills out what that order is. So it's important to consult her on all this. So Maxim was the talkative one. He couldn't keep any of this still. So he went and told everybody about that as soon as they brought in their cows. And Melanie, they're kind of absolute different, because Maxim had almost no education. He was left on the streets all day to beg. He had almost no food. He died young out of poor health and starvation, basically. Both of these are poster children for our times, for the street kids and the abused children, neglected children. But Melanie was the other. She had a really diabolical mother who was really very abusive. And when Melanie was only 3 or 4, we're not sure exactly, 3 or 4, her mother said, "Get out of the house, I'm tired of you." And so the child wandered into the woods and was in the woods for 2 weeks, they calculate. And so a little boy came to bring her food, and he started teaching her about the importance of making sacrifices. And she didn't know for a long time that it was Jesus. And then from the age of 6, her mother would hire her out. In the winter, she would have to be like a governess, a babysitter for different households in the Alps. But in the summer, she was out in all kinds of weather, rain and shine and everything, just out with the cows or the sheep all day long alone. And Jesus would come and talk to her about sacrifices, and she would start doing a lot of sacrifices. And then souls in purgatory were visiting her and asking her for alms of prayers. And she advanced very far. And we don't know exactly when. It was either around the age of 4 or 10 that she received the stigmata, because she wanted to suffer more. And she's the earliest person in church history that received the stigmata. And so she was very, very advanced spiritually.
This is
at the
Melanie?
time. Yes. So when she was 14,
wow.
yeah. So when Our Lady appeared to her, it was just one more apparition in her arsenal. But for Maxim, it was, life-changing, the one and only thing.
Sure.
So, but she was kind of, she did not know how to socialize with people. So she was always a little bit, shy, and she would express herself rather roughly, but people loved her. She was greatly revered by the village. And so the bishop was very concerned about them going back home, because he knew what their households were like. And now they were having, the news spread rapidly. So rapidly, it was just wildfire news all across Europe, because this is the first public revelation, and people were so touched that Mary was weeping. She was so worried about their salvation. That was just like a mother, just gushing with tears for them. And the conversions were just outstanding. People were traveling all across Europe, from England, from Belgium, and they would go up those Alps, which was no joke in the 1800s. That's a mule and sticks and trying to get up there. And so a pilgrimage was really an act of penance. And there were, and local priests would offer their time. They just pitched up tents or whatever and heard confessions all day and had outdoor masses. So it was wild, just the fervor. And the bishop was very concerned because of all the pilgrimages. The children would have to tell the story over and over all day long. So they had some sisters in the area who took in orphans and stuff. And so the children lived with them, and the sisters just revered Melanie and wanted Melanie to join them. So anyway, that's a whole story on Melanie's life, but it was wonderful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I didn't know some of those facts. Not that I don't believe you, but I think I'll have to go back and just check them out. Like I didn't know that she had stigmata. So are you saying that when she had the apparition of Our Lady, she already possessed the stigmata?
Yes. And
wow.
Actually, Mary's hands, this isn't perfectly, many of them don't quite show it, but her hands were covered the whole time, and her feet were covered. And I always wonder if Mary herself had the stigmata, because at Amsterdam, which is, has been approved and not approved, she has the stigmata. And at Akita, her hand bleeds because it is stigmatized. So there's kind of a tradition of spiritual stigmata, because whether she had it physically or not, Mary stood by the cross and she did suffer with Jesus. So she is kind of a co-redemptrix in that way. So yeah, it's interesting.
So I'm a Marian theologian. So my specialty, my advanced degree is really it's in systematic theology, but all my research focused on Mariology and Marian theology. So and with the Champion Wisconsin apparition, that's kind of been the one that I've theologized the most about. Some people think that I'm the English scholar on Our Lady of Borang in Belgium as well, but
Good for you. I got to get to know you better.
Yeah, so one of the things, I belong to, I'm a former president of the Mariological Society of America. And so every year we have a conference, and so we have a convention every year, and maybe 50 people come, 30 people attend online, and we basically present academic papers. So it just so happens next year's topic is Marian apparitions, and we're focusing on that, and just because of the new norms that were released, things like that. But so when we put together the call for papers, and I wasn't involved with the call for papers, that's a different committee that I'm not on. But when they put it together and we disseminated it to people, there is a notation here. So like there's about 13 things they recommend you could write about or propose a topic on. Now, I personally am going to write, or I'm gonna propose a paper, something along the lines of an unapproved pilgrimage to Mary's false apparitions in America or something like that. So essentially just look at, intellectually an unapproved pilgrimage, but looking at like the theology that kind of brought about the condemnation of Nisida or Bayside or Conyers or whatever. So that's kind of what I want to do. But one of the points we have here in our proposal, and I guess, you've presented this book on the secret of Our Lady of La Salette. So I just want to get your take on this. The discovery of the secret of La Salette, it's right there. Our point for a possible topic is approved Marian apparitions with disapproved aspects. Example, the 1879 Secret of La Salette. So not knowing myself all of the backstory of La Salette and the approval or non-approval, and sometimes the secrets, we see this with Fatima. The secret of Fatima is disputed whether or not the third secret was ever revealed or not. And, you have kind of the sketchiness of the fact that it was supposed to be revealed at this point and it wasn't, and then it was years later, whatever. So we're not talking about Fatima, we're talking about La Salette, but like, I don't know the backstory. So is your book about this, what one scholar has called a disapproved aspect, the 1879 Secret of La Salette, or what does that mean, and what does your book address?
I was worried myself. I needed to know this, like if the secret, I mean, Melanie says the rule isn't part of the secret, because she was already able to share that with some people right away without waiting the 12 years. But yes, I mean, because that did not get revealed until 12 years afterwards, whereas the secret was approved 5 years after the apparition. So was it a package deal, or was it separate? Does the secret have to be approved separately? And so that was very important to me. And the most important book on La Salette has been in French since 1999, and hardly anybody in the world knows about it, because when it was published in 1999, it should have struck the world like if we published the third secret of Fatima in 1960, that would have been, what would have that been? Everybody would have been buying that book. But when this came out in France was already losing the faith so much. It wasn't even interested, wasn't even thinking about La Salette anymore. So it wasn't a big deal. But so what happened was, we now know, okay, I could go, which way do I take this from? Okay, so there was, when the secret even before the secret came out, a lot of the bishops were being criticized in the secret, but they weren't even worried about that. The bishops were very political. They were very aligned with were they secretly Freemasons? We'll never be able to prove that, but they were very aligned with the Masonic government, with Napoleon and all this fraternity, that kind of the themes of the time. They were very worldly. They were not well respected by the laity because they were so worldly. They were never in union with the Pope. They were always criticizing Italy. The French were like an enclave of themselves, these French bishops, many from wealthy families, and they just wanted to make more wealth, and it was very bad. And so they were worried that there was going to be a secret. What they were worried about was what the good Catholic laity were wanting. The good Catholic laity said, can't we have back our Catholic royalty? Isn't there a successor somewhere to the guillotine Louis XVI? So there was this whole desire to bring back the Catholic monarchy in the Catholic laity, but the hierarchy was all about the Napoleon government and being very secular. And so the bishops and archbishops were terrified that, this secret, and they didn't really believe much. They figured adults were you're behind all of these apparitions, that the kids didn't have anything, that was all being masterminded by some adult. And so they were afraid that the secret was going to reveal the successor to Louis XVI. And so what they started to do as soon as possible was to start shooting the messengers. You start maligning them. So they first of all, the bishop who approved the apparition was a hero of the the 1790 revolution. So he was very elderly, in almost 90 when this happened. And he was a very saintly man, and he recognized that this was real, and he wanted to get this approved properly. And so he worked with Pius IX to consult him. I'll get back to that in a second. But he had to retire soon because he was at the end. So the next 4 bishops in the La Salette area, it was the Grenoble See. They were all very worldly men and probably Freemasons. And they just kept Melanie excommunicated from France the rest of her life, is basically what they kept. And so she was exiled very young to a Carmelite monastery in England. But she didn't care. She just said, I will stay there until Mary tells me to make the secret known, then I will have to get it out. And so, they thought, well, once she has solemn vows, she can't get out. So, but the bishop in England said, no, he consulted the Pope, said, no, she has to get out. So, but she couldn't find anyone to publish it anywhere. So she didn't get to publish it in 1858, 12 years afterwards. She didn't get it published until she was in Italy and worked with some Italian bishops and went through Leo the 13th and his court, let them all examine it. And so it got published with an imprimatur, the approval of the Holy See in 1879. But so Melanie had quite an odyssey defending the secret. But what was happening in the French papers, a lot of them were Catholic laity. They would publish Melanie's commentaries or her letters or anything she said about the secret, but then they would comment on it themselves, and they would say, this must mean this and this must mean that. And after a while in the French papers, you couldn't tell what was the original text and what's the commentary. And then there were other people, the bishops especially, saying that the children were unfaithful, they were just terrible, they had all these lies about the children, just terrible calumnies about the children. And these were coming from bishops. And so people thought, oh, well, this must be true. The children have been unfaithful and they've invented the secret because they missed the attention. So it's a big mess. And so we had never been sure about the whole La Salette. Finally, it all kind of died out when Melanie died. Leo the 13th couldn't get the order started because there was so much politics going on. Italy was a complete disaster because Italy was being in one revolution after another. There were a lot of Freemasons down there that are anti-Catholic. And at that time, Italy was a bunch of little kingdoms. It wasn't just Italy. And so it was very complicated. So in the end, we're all confused about La Salette. And many people don't even know there was a rule because it just kind of got forgotten. All we know is there was this secret, and Benedict XV ordered that he didn't order that you couldn't publish the secret, but he ordered that people not comment on it because there was just so much chaos, and he didn't want priests getting caught up in this. And so people thought the secret had been forbidden, but that really wasn't the context. That was part of the fake news. Other people said, oh, the Pope forbade it, but he didn't if you look at the text. But anyway, after World War I and World War II, when France had been through so many persecutions, Catholics began looking back and say, was this something that Mary had predicted, that if we didn't convert, France would be really persecuted and tried and go through many chastisements? Look how many people have died in these wars and how much we're suffering now. And so they began to be really interested in finding out the truth of La Salette. And so there emerged a whole society to vindicate the reputations of the children and to find the true documents. And so there was a long process of collecting things, but they still couldn't quite nail it down because they didn't they couldn't prove anything. They had good texts, but they weren't positive. And then the son of the president of one of these societies, he had grown up with the whole La Salette thing, and he felt called to be a priest, and he became ordained. He was born in France, but he was ordained for Africa. And so at some point he came back to Rome to study for his doctorate, and he chose as his theme naturally La Salette because that was his family's love. And so he was there that summer when it just so happened by divine coincidence that the Vatican archives, which were releasing Pope after Pope going backwards, that year, that summer, they said they were opening up the papers and documents of Leo the 13th. And so he applied for permission to go there. And so he had to wait a couple months, but he spent 2 weeks all day long going through uncatalogued clusters of old documents, of Leo the 13th. On the Feast of the Guardian Angels, he opened up, he said, this is Melanie's handwriting. He opened up the envelope, and those were the secrets that were written down in front of the Bishop of Grenoble in 1851 and sent to Pope Pius IX. And that was in their handwriting. And so now it was incontrovertible that the children did not make this up years later. It was already there. And so Pius IX had already seen it, and he had given the nod to the Bishop of Grenoble, like, go for it. And it said in there that the children could not release the secrets right away. So the Pope respected that, but he obeyed some of the things in the secrets, because Mary says for him not to leave Rome anymore, because if he left Rome, people would go and occupy the Vatican, and he wouldn't get back in. It was that bad. So it was crazy. So this priest collaborated with the very famous Mariologist, Father René Laurentin, and together they produced this very detailed description, of what went on with the secrets, the versions of the secrets, and how they emerged and where they are and what we have now. And now even the Fathers of La Salette, that congregation has always said, oh, the children made it up later. We just push the main message of La Salette. We never talk about the secrets of those children now, even though they have been silenced now because they can't say anything. They realize, and some of these fathers are very excited about Melanie and Maxim now. So we have this, and then, I come out of the cloister and I'm supposed to promote this rule. And how do I prove to a bishop that the secret and the rule was approved? Here we've got everything documented that Leo called her to Rome, and it was, that it's not that it really doesn't, we don't really care in some ways whether the rule came from heaven or came from my imagination or somebody's imagination. The church only cares if it's a good rule for the church, if the order will do good things for the church, and if the people who want to do this rule can pull it off and do this obediently. So the church doesn't really have to pronounce it. We'll never know for sure, because we can't dogmatize on private revelation, but at least we have that the whole apparition was approved. It was a package deal. So we can say the Secret of La Salette was approved by the Bishop of Grenoble, and even Pius IX knew about it. So and Leo the 13th, barely in office, and he said, I want to read those secrets. Where are those letters? That was the first thing on his mind as Pope. So
have you been a pilgrim to La Salette yet?
I would never have dreamed it, but I got an invitation, and someone had frequent flyer miles, and I went there. I met Father Michel Corteville, and I got access to a number of things and got to scan in even the original letters of some of Maxim and Melanie. So I collected a lot of documentation. I have in digital form the French version of Father Corteville. He eventually did his dissertation, 1,000 pages on the rule, everything he could find on the rule and the constitutions. And so most of that now is translated too, with all my helpers. And then a beautiful couple, they took their camper and took me all the way to La Salette. So I got to spend a few days there. So yes, I've had my pilgrimage. So
oh, that's wonderful. Why do you think Melanie and Maximum are not saints?
Well, because they were maligned forever. So it was only in 1999 that their reputations have been vindicated. Before that, it was always in doubt. And today, if you go on the internet, a lot of that material in French and translated into English, it's still, all that fake news is still out there. People are still confused. People still have a bad taste in their mouth because, oh, Melanie was a bad person and she made all this up. And it's lies. It's a lot of libel out there.
Yeah, I guess I can kind of resonate with that, because I think I always was, it wasn't that I was opposed to or against La Salette, but I always kind of approached La Salette with some trepidation, like what do people really think about it and such. Yeah. So so that is out there. You're not wrong there. So well, that's all very interesting. I've learned a lot about La Salette. I've learned a lot about the secrets. I didn't know that there was a rule of life, didn't know a lot of the things that you shared today. So I think, it behooves us to learn about the messages Mary has spoken, how she's encouraging us to live our life, how we try to conform our life more and more to the gospel. Because when Mary appears, really, what does she want? She wants us to come back to her son Jesus, and to the church, and to return to grace, and that's exactly what La Salette is helping people do. So, if people want to get a copy of the book, if they want to learn more about you, where should they go?
Well, I am very grateful to a little bitty company in Louisiana. Catholic dads put it together. They wanted to publish their own little books on Mary, and they couldn't find a publisher, so they just started their own company. It's Holy Water Books, but they do work with Amazon, so you can get it at Amazon also. What was wonderful about them is I have to pay royalties to the original French publishers because, this is only a translation. It's not my work. So and they all are Cajuns and they speak French. So they were able to expedite all those things. So I'm so grateful to Holy Water Books. But you can get it at Amazon. And my website, if you're interested in becoming a priest, a brother, or a sister, or even a lay associate of the Order of the Mother of God, I'm at House of Mary, omd.org. OMD is Ordis Matris Dei, the Order of Mother of God in Latin. So that will be our initials once we get the habit and approved. And we do have a bishop who's allowing us to start. I need at least a good dozen candidates of each sex before we would, viably attempt, a place to live together and prove to the bishop we know what we're doing. We have a few of each sex standing by. So we need a few more candidates. So, but, this is not recruiting. I mean, I'm not calling people to join the Army or join the Marines, but really you can't answer the call of the gospel unless you hear it. And so if it resonates with your heart, this order might be what you've been kind of wanting in your heart and you didn't know about it.
Well, very good. Well, thank you so much, sister, for sharing all about La Salette and about how God has called you in your life and how you continue to respond to that call.
Well, thank you for your platform, Father, for talking about Mary. What is more important than that? God bless you and bless me too.
If you liked today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. And don't forget to stay up to date with what Father Edward is doing by following him on Facebook, X, or Instagram at the handle @FrEdwardLooney. Thanks for listening, and please join Father Edward again next time for another inspiring conversation.